Hello, and welcome to today's program brought to you by the U.S. Botanic Garden. My name is Courtney Burrs, USBG's online education specialist with the Learning and Outreach team here at the Garden. We're so happy to have you joining us for Listening to the Plants, Exploring the World of Plants and Sounds, an online lecture led by Dr. Heather Spence. We are especially excited to have Dr. Heather Spence kick off our online series as we journey through the realm of plant music. This summer, we will meet artists who are scientists, musicians, sound designers, and inventors who utilize innovative technologies to engage with plants in remarkable ways. Biologist and composer Dr. Heather Spence merges science and music to engage communities in deep connection with nature. Heather's work promotes creative, integrative, win win approaches to seeming conflicts between humans and our environment. Over the span of 2 decades, she has partnered with coastal stakeholders, establishing the first network of underwater listening stations in the Mesoamerican reef system and developing methods for listening based, non technical, participatory science. Please welcome acoustic ecologist Dr. Heather Spence.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm super jazzed to talk with you guys about plants and sound. And I do want this to be interactive, and I encourage you to use the chat and to warm ourselves up a little bit. I would love for any of those of you who would like to share in the chat about perhaps do you talk to your plants or sing to your plants? And what do you talk to them about, or what do you sing about to your plants? So if you'd like to share something about your relationship with plants and sound in the chat, that would be great. And I'm going to take us on a little tour and a little kind of orientation to the different ways that we can think about the relationship of plants and sound and humans. So before we do that, get into the details, let's just make sure we're all kind of on the same page about what sound is really all about. And I love sound. I love thinking about sound and soundscapes and music and the way music can make us feel. And what's interesting about sound is that it's this physical phenomenon, and sound is really a pressure wave. So it's not that there's some, substance that comes out of my mouth and goes into your ear. It's actually a denseness, a place of denseness that's traveling through some medium. Could be air, could be water, could be something solid. And so on the left, you can kind of see when we talk about sound waves, what are we talking about? We're talking about areas of denseness or less denseness. And when we're talking about waves, we're usually talking about that sound pressure, that density of the medium. So I'm going to show a quick video on the right. And this is just demonstrating how sound travels through different media. And so the denser the medium, so let's say a solid, the faster the sound is going to travel through that medium. So when we think about plants and sounds, I've grouped this into basically 4 categories. So plants respond to sounds, they make sounds, they change sounds and soundscapes, and they also inspire sounds. So a lot of what you're going to be experiencing over the rest of this series over the summer is going to be a lot of this inspiring sounds aspect. But I want to make sure we think about all of these other categories too, because it all kind of fits together when we're thinking about plants and sound. So let's start with plants responding to sounds. Okay, so one of the things that people are probably more familiar with is like science experiments where you play music to plants and you see, if they grow better with different types of music or no music or more music. And what's interesting about this is that there are actually a bunch of research studies on this, and there are impacts to plant growth but it's not clear from the research what exactly there's not one clear winner, like, oh, well, this type of music is definitely the best. No, there's all these different studies, all different types of musics and scenarios, and there's a whole variety of types of responses. There are responses, though. So we do have this idea, okay, well, we have this idea that music does impact plant growth, but how exactly that works, why exactly that works, is still something that there's a lot left to be determined. One thing that I think is pretty interesting is that there is some research to show that roots can grow in the direction of the sound of water. And so actual water is a very important thing to the plant, finding the water, that's very important to their survival. And so it kind of makes sense that they might use an acoustic cue also to be able to find that water and orient their roots towards the source of that sound. And I'll just throw out a couple of terms here. So phonotropism and hydrotropism. Okay, so phonotropism, phono like sound, is going towards the sound, and hydrotropism, hydro like water, going towards the water. So plants making sounds. When we think about plants making sounds, something that we're quite familiar with is thinking about plants making sounds through movement. If you think about dry leaves in the fall, depending on where you live, or any kind of dry leaves, they can make kind of a rustling noise in the wind. You can think about, other kinds of, like, maybe some, parts of the plant might rub against other parts of the plant. So movement of the plant can produce sound. And actually, that's an example of this. I'll play you just a little snippet. An example of this is actually a bamboo forest was designated by Japan as one of the top 100 soundscapes of the country to kind of raise awareness of the importance of preserving, not just thinking about environments and habitats, but thinking about the sounds as an important part of that ecosystem. So I'll play you a little bit of wind in this bamboo forest. So that's one way that plants make sounds. Another is through some internal processes. And so this is something pretty new. Maybe you even, heard, saw some stuff on the internet. It was a year or two ago when it was like plants scream when they're cut. And that was all kind of based on this new research that's been coming out about how plants are actually making popping sounds, and they make more popping sounds when they're stressed, if they're dehydrated or if they're cut. And what these researchers did is they brought those very high-pitched, ultrasonic, above the human range of hearing, brought those sounds down into our range of hearing, and also sped them up so that we could experience that on a more human time scale. And it's really pretty amazing. So I'm going to, this clicking sound is actually due to the water tubes that they have inside. And when there's like a bubble bursting, or there's a bend in the tube, that's what's actually creating these clicking sounds. So I'll just play a quick clip of that. Again, these are too high for us to hear. They're being brought down into our range of hearing.
This is an example of such a manipulation we did on tomato sounds that we recorded. And these are sounds that were recorded from grapevines and manipulated in the same manner.
when a tomato plant is
So this is very evocative because, okay, so we're talking to our plants, but are they talking back to us? And just because humans can't hear ultrasonic sounds unless we use technology, there are animals, including pollinators, like bats, who are very comfortable listening in the ultrasonic range. So it's a very interesting thing to start thinking about, this idea that plants are making these sounds, and what do they mean?
This is an example of
So moving on to plants change sounds. So when we think about the sounds that are all around us right now, actually let's do a quick tune in. So we're constantly surrounded by sound. Sound is very, very important to us, but we aren't necessarily always consciously aware of the sounds that we're hearing. So one exercise I like to do is to do a tune-in where we kind of orient ourselves to the sounds that are around us and actively focus on them. And if you're, we as humans, we're pretty visually oriented, so it sometimes takes a little bit for us to get into that sonic space to be focused on our soundscape. But just to really bring home how important sound is to humans, even though we're very visually oriented, when we're sleeping, our eyes are closed, our ears are still open. So let's just do a quick tune in. What we're going to do, you can close your eyes if you like. Sometimes that helps, and just take a few moments and notice the sounds that you can hear around you. And as you're listening, maybe notice if you can identify the source of the sound, and maybe also notice, what does the sound like? Is it low? Is it high? Is it constant? Is it intermittent? Is it pleasing? Is it annoying? We'll take just one more moment. See if you can discover any more sounds. Can you find something really subtle that maybe you haven't noticed yet? Okay, you can open your eyes. So that was just a little glimpse into your personal soundscape. I love doing these tune-ins anytime I need to kind of center myself or really get my ears ready to listen. And so when we think about soundscapes, which are, this is the sum total of the sounds in a particular place, like landscape, only soundscape, plants are very important in shaping soundscapes. So one of the ways that they do that, if you think about, for example, a tree, is different parts of the tree will do different things to sound that is passing by. And so, the leaves will be scattering those high frequency sounds, whereas the hard trunk will be reflecting, absorbing, and scattering more low frequency sounds. And that can really change the way that the soundscape is experienced by us, by other animals. And something I've really enjoyed doing at the U.S. Botanic Garden is serving as an expert is in, and talking with people as they come to visit about plants and sound. And one of the things I think is really impactful, this is a picture of the main hall, and I think it becomes very clear when you think about that room that you're looking at, and you think, how would that room sound different if there were no plants in it? And that, I think, is very, the moment you start to think about it, you think, oh, okay, the plants are really shaping that soundscape and making it more pleasant. Without those plants, you're probably gonna have a lot of echoes in there, gonna sound very different without those plants. So that brings us to plants inspiring sounds. So in this case, we're really thinking about that human-plant connection. And when we think about the types of roles that humans play in this process, so that could be collecting data about the plants, collecting information about the plants. It could be collecting sounds made by the plants, interpretation of those sounds, which brings together both science and musical practices, manipulating those sounds in a variety of different ways. We can also think about creating and playing instruments made of plants, creating music from data or sounds that have been collected from the plant, and creating music inspired by plants. So a lot of different ways that humans are engaging with plants in a sonic way. And when you think about the roles of the plant, okay, so the plant is doing a bunch of stuff, right? And that produces data. You can collect data from a plant. A simple one would be like, height, but it could be also voltage differences and other things that you could collect from the plant. The plant, as we've discussed, can produce sounds, and also just, being awesome, right? So plants are pretty cool, and there are all kinds of ways that the awesomeness of plants can inspire music made by humans. So when we think about plants inspiring sounds, just a quick note of kind of orienting us. So we talk about sound and we talk about music. And these concepts are very interconnected. And without getting too philosophical, you could think of a sort of gradient of sound to music, but really it's more of a huge gray area in the middle that we could argue about for days. What is music? What is sound? But when you think, just to kind of give us a slight orientation to this, one of the ways that people start to create compositions from plants is a process called sonification, where you're taking the data and translating those into musical properties like pitches, loudness, timbre. And so each data point then corresponds to a level of these different musical parameters. And the outcome of that, how it sounds in terms of how much like music that we're familiar with, how much it sounds like, that really depends on the person who is doing the interpretation and the translation of that data to sound. You also have things like soundscape composition. So this is really where you're recording a soundscape, but you're doing it in a very deliberate way. Maybe you're choosing particular sections or layering things and creating something that tells us, kind of tells a whole arc of a story in a composition form, but based on the actual sounds in a soundscape. And then you have music that incorporates soundscapes. So, you might think about one of the more common ones, like nice tranquil like piano music with some ocean waves. But there's all kinds of music that incorporates soundscapes, and so you have a combination of sort of the more traditional musical elements, maybe instruments or singing, and then you have the recorded sounds as a part of that. And then you have music that's not incorporating those raw recordings, but is nevertheless inspired by plants in a variety of different ways. So again, we could get real philosophical about this, but this is just a little bit of an orientation to how we might think about sound and music when we're thinking about the inspiration that we get from plants. Now, plant instruments. So a lot of the instruments that we might think about, modern instruments, even orchestral instruments, are made of plant parts. And it's really important for people who are constructing these instruments to know about the different physical properties of different plant parts, and different species of plants are used for different types of instruments or parts of instruments. So different parts, for example, I play the cello, different parts of the cello are made from different kinds of wood because of their physical properties. In some places on the cello, you want it to vibrate a lot. In other places, you want it to be more rigid. And you could take something like a rain stick, okay, made out of cactus, put the spines inside, and then have the beads or gravel flowing. And so, pan pipes, all kinds of different instruments, from very complex to even just taking. So one of the things that I have at my expert is in table at the garden is a cacao pod that's dried, and you shake that, and you've got yourself a shaker. So it doesn't have to be extremely far away from the plant material itself to be a plant instrument like that. Now, another thing that can be done is more subtle plant sounds, and a lot of that can be done through human interaction with a plant or a plant part. Anytime you've got movement, you've pretty much got sound. And so, but it might be very subtle. So what you can do is you can amplify that sound, and then that can be part of a musical composition. And then we get into more like electronic plant instruments. And so then these are, you're relying on a programmed system, some computer, to help this along. And so some instruments built this way are based on some subset or a combination of water and conductivity and touch. So if you look at the picture at the top here, that's a plant instrument that's based on water and conductivity and touch. And so it's basically a fruit instrument. And so when you, a human full of water, touches a fruit and you touch the ground, you're completing the circuit, and it's programmed to play a sound. And so there's this interactive element of touching plants and creating sounds that's very evocative. And there's different ways of doing that. Some of it is a triggering an on and off kind of sound. So it's like basically the programming on the back end is play sound, don't play sound. Some of it can be based on how strong or that connection is, or properties of that conductivity touch can change the nature of the sound. And then there's another way of doing this where you're collecting data, and I mentioned sonification before. So where you're taking data from the plant, non-sound data, and then you're converting that into sounds And so one of the ways that's done is through voltage differences. And so you can, put sensors on two different parts of the plant that are measuring the different voltage differences that can be converted into waves that can be converted into sound waves and then converted further into a musical experience. This is just a couple examples. I'll just play a little short video clip of people experiencing some of these plant instrument opportunities at the garden.
This is my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I programmed that, and those sounds are inspired by the sounds that plants make. Here's another clip.
Themselves actually do make sounds. Now these sounds are sounds that I created inspired by the sounds that plants make. This is a fruit instrument, and so if you touch this orange and you touch any other fruit at the same time, it'll make a sound. You could be like a fruit DJ.
Will they always make the same sound?
The way I have it set up right now, yes. Might change it up later. We'll see.
So people get very, very excited about this way of being able to interact with plants and having the fruit be able to make a sound back at you is a pretty great experience.
Themselves actually do make sounds. Now these.
There we go. So just to give one more example, and then I'll wrap this up and turn to questions, and we can chat about whatever is on anybody's mind. So this is actually brand new, inspired by the tomato plant, the sounds created, those ultrasonic sounds created by the tomato plant. I actually wrote a little piece. I'll play a little bit of it right now. All of the sounds, I'm giving you an image. This is from my digital audio workstation. So each line that you're seeing across here is a separate stem or track within the piece, and the top part here, the stuff in green, is the sounds made by the tomato plant, and then I have included in here some soundscape recordings from humans interacting with actual tomatoes. So I'll play you a little bit of this. Here, let me start here. Okay, so great. Let's have a conversation.
Yep. Okay, great. All righty. So we did have some questions from folks. Thank you so much for sharing. And we can honestly start with which plants did you find to be the chattiest when you go in and do the work?
Yeah. So Yeah, so I can't take credit for these discoveries of the plants making the sounds, but I have dug into that work quite a bit, and it's in terms of chattiest, it's the ones who are the most stressed, have the most
Mm.
to say about it. That's the main thing. That seems to be true across species. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our audience members asked about the sounds of the plants. Would they exist if it were not for the watering tube? So, can you talk a little bit about the
Oh yeah.
relationship between sound and the water moving through the plant?
Yeah. So when I'm saying the tubes, I'm talking about the internal tube. So like there's this water transport system inside the plant, and that's what I'm talking about. So it is, it's a structural part of the plant that is creating that sound. The same way, we produce sounds. We call them vocalizations, right? We have our vocal cords in this whole system, but there are other animals that use very different systems to make sounds, and so the plants making sounds in another way is, maybe not that weird. What it means, the implications of it, though, I think are something we're just beginning to think about. But yes, it's not the sound. The sound is coming from the plant. It's not like a byproduct of some human watering system or anything like that.
Okay, so with the sound coming from the plant, like for example, for the tomato heartbeat, right? Is that more of a stressful noise, or did it only sound that way because that's the way it was programmed to sound? Like, how much of it is the actual plant sound, and how much of it is the programming of the
So
sonic sounds?
yeah, so what you heard in the video, when I played that little clip of video, and he was like, "Here's a tomato, here's a grapevine."
Mm-hmm.
So that was that manipulation was just bringing it down into human hearing range, not really like manipulating it other ways. When I created that soundscape composition, yes, I manipulated it further. Not anything too crazy. I brought it down a little bit lower. I took samples of it. And was I going for an eerie quality? Yes, I was. Right? Okay. So there's, so there's kind of layers of like what types of manipulations you do. I will say for me, so I've developed a practice in what I call nature music, and what it's really about is that drawing true, not just drawing inspiration from soundscapes, but also having the patterns and the sounds driving the composition process. And I think that's what's kind of unusual about my approach, is that, I don't set out with like, here's the genre, here's the tempo, here's the melody. Now I'm going to insert some sounds to get the effect that I'm looking for. It's the sounds that are telling me like, okay, this is what the composition is going to be. And so, and I also am using kind of this dual science music approach. And so I can know from science what manipulations might mean. So for example, let's say you take a sound and you manipulate it in time, right? Let's say you speed it up or slow it down. And somebody might say, oh, well, you're just changing the sound to like make it into something totally different. Well, I would argue that it's something, it's more nuanced than that, because each species experiences time a little different way. And so by stretching or compressing things in time, you might actually be playing with this idea of getting outside our usual human perceptions. So, and pitch can be similarly with that. So that's just, a little bit of an idea of how that can work.
Gotcha. Our next question here is, where there was a comment that I bet there's a connection between rhythm, water, root growth, and plant strength. Could you speak to that?
rhythm,
water,
water,
root
root
growth,
growth.
and plant strength.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I am sure. I mean, the question I would have back to that person is, um, rhythm of what, right? Are we talking
Uh-huh.
about plant rhythms,
Uh-huh.
sounds of the plant, some other rhythms? I mean, we could get into a whole bunch of things
Right.
there. But yeah, I mean, I think that connection makes a lot of sense. And I think there's probably also a lot of interest in finding out what the relationships are, with different aspects of plant health and sounds, the response to sounds as well as the creation of sounds, because we could figure out more about what those interdynamics mean. There's probably a lot of commercial aspects, that could be drawn from that, right? So.
Gotcha. Dr. Heather, how did you get interested in this field of study? It seems to have so many different implications in a lot of different areas. So how did you get interested?
Yeah, sound is what started it all. I've always been super fascinated by sounds. I would say fascinated, and as a kid, I was very, very sensitive to sounds, and that led me to kind of start harmonizing with noises. It led me to pay a lot of attention to different musical pieces and try to figure out why certain pieces of music would make me feel a certain way. So then, like, as I got older, I would experiment with that. I'd try to recreate something that I'd heard, and then I would like experiment with it. I'd be like, well, if I change this, does it still make me feel the same way? What if I change this too? Does it still make me feel the same way? That kind of thing, and that kind of naturally led into composing. And I went to college on a music scholarship, but I was not required to major in music. So I did a ton of music, but I also wanted to kind of understand, how does sound work? And to do that, I needed to take some biology and physics. So that kind of led me on this science path, and this combined interest in the science and music of natural sounds.
And so you said you play the cello.
Yeah.
Have you done compositions with plants and with the musical instruments that you play?
Yeah, so my compositions are a little varied. So when I gave that gradient of different things, like from sound to music, so I'm kind of hitting a lot of the different parts of that spectrum. So I have done sonification based music, where you're taking data and then converting that into sound. I've also, and to my knowledge, I might be the only person doing this. I have yet to encounter somebody else who is. So if you know somebody, let me know, because I think it's cool. Sonification of sound itself. I can get a little meta with this things.
Okay.
But like, taking a sound and then taking properties of those sound and taking that sound data and then converting that back into sound. So you can get real technical with that stuff. And so some of it is, just using, like with that tomato plant composition, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's impactful to have it be entirely soundscapes, right? Like, I didn't create the initial content for any of, for that directly, like through, instruments and things. But I also do, things on the complete other end of the spectrum, like writing pieces for orchestra, or, ensembles of normal instruments, that take some of the patterns and, and rhythms, and ideas from soundscapes and the science of the soundscapes, and then translating them, even more into something that is more generally recognized as music,
Yeah.
in a more common way. And then there's the middle stuff too. Like, I've done stuff with cello and recorded sound, and so soundscape composition, where I play the cello with it, and that can create sort of this harmonization moment that's where the cello almost acts like a tour guide through this more strange soundscape composition, kind of duetting with it, highlighting certain rhythms. And I found that to be a very effective method because it's this way of like helping us like connect with that more strange soundscape.
Co-creating
Yeah.
with the cello and the soundscape, like jazz improvisation. Is there a connection to that? Like that sort of idea?
There are certainly improvisatory elements to some of my compositions. Sometimes I'll do things where it's kind of improvisation, but I set some boundaries on that, or set some inputs to that. So yes, I mean that. So there are definitely tie-ins there.
Gotcha. So thinking about from music to even just plants communicating with each other, have you done any research on plants talking to each other? And if so, can you record those sorts of sounds and notice any differences between how humans interact with each other?
I love that. I mean, I think you guys should start doing that at the garden. I have not, but like, let's do it.
Yeah. It starts with the question, right? Like, I wonder if, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thinking about some of the other things that our audiences, want to know about. There's someone who has a plot in her community garden that's beside a metro station. She wonders if the sounds of the train will affect the vegetables.
I mean, if it's something that you thought of and you're like, maybe, probably yes. And another thing I'll say about sound, right? So we also experience sound as vibration. And of course, vibrations and the rhythms of those vibrations can impact us. They naturally impact plants. Plants are experiencing sounds. So my guess is yes. How? Not sure, but probably there's an effect there.
So if one of our folks wants to know, would you recommend then as like entry level equipment to record nature sounds as background sounds, even for guitar play, or to create a nature sound library?
That's a great question. Yeah, so there are, so starting out like pretty basic, I have actually created some musical compositions just with like an app on my phone. An advantage of the phone these days is that you have it with you. And so what I sometimes say is like, you could have the best recording equipment in the whole world, but if you don't have it with you and it's not turned on, you haven't captured anything that you can use. So from a practical perspective, even a pretty simple sound recording app, you may want to go into the settings and make sure that it is not optimized for voice notes. So you can go into the settings, you can kind of and look and see like increase the sample rate, make sure it's not cutting out silences, and that'll improve the quality of the recordings. If you want to get a little fancier, you might want to get like a windscreen. You might want to get like an external microphone. A setup that I have that's pretty portable, but I don't carry it with me everywhere. I have a Zoom F3, which is, wait, I have it right here. Just happen to have this right here. So it's small. Again, you can see I'm like, you can get real fancy out in nature. And you saw that guy in the bamboo forest with like all his stuff, right? But let's be realistic here. This is actually, it doesn't come with it, but you can actually strap this to your wrist. I just put like a medical wrist strap. You can get them online. They're pretty cheap, and put that through. So you can actually strap this to your wrist. It has two inputs, and you can get yourself a lavalier microphone. Those are pretty cheap, and they record pretty well. So that's what I have here. So this is just a lavalier microphone, covered with this fuzzy windscreen. And so I have that in one port, and what I have in the other right now, but you could put anything you want. You could get stereo with 2 different lavalier mics if you want to. But I have an underwater microphone in the other. And what this allows me to do is to get simultaneous recording underwater and in air, which I've been doing a lot of lately. So so that's a fairly, step up from the phone, fairly simple portable setup. But, any kind of, all you really need is semi-decent microphone and something that you can record into, and ideally that thing that you are recording into, it's nice to also be able to plug in headphones with that to be able to hear what's going on. So yeah, so you can do a setup pretty simply.
Yeah, it sounds like just going to the store, clicking on a couple of things, getting a couple of things, will help us to kind of tap in and tune into plants. What are some of the how can we help people like really connect with and appreciate plants, just by doing this sort of exercise? Like maybe you can even speak to how it has helped you connect with plants on a deeper level.
I think what's hard with plants is that they're so different from us that establishing that empathy, that connection, in a meaningful way can be difficult. Now, maybe not, because if you're interacting with your plants, you're watering them, you're singing to them, like maybe you've got a whiz-bang relationship with your plants and you're good. But still, it can be hard to kind of understand them. Now they do some things that plants have behaviors that we can recognize. Mm-hmm. And I think some of those behaviors, because of how they relate to human behaviors, kind of help us in that regard. So the fact that, if a plant needs to be watered, it droops, right? And when we think about human behavior and we're drooping, right, that makes us think about like sadness, right? So I think that's kind of a helpful like tie-in of our behavior with plant behavior, because then we're like, oh you're sad, you need water, let me water you, right? So finding other ways that we can do that, and connect on other levels with the plant. Sound can be a great way to establish those connections, and sometimes we'll need to translate those sounds, whether that's bringing the sounds into our own range of hearing, turning them into music, however that happens, can be a way that we establish that connection in additional ways. And now I've kind of forgotten what the original question was, but I think
it was really about, no, that's it. It was really about connecting on a deeper level with plants. And I think as we are thinking about connecting with plants, you said something so key, that plants are not like us, right? And a lot of times we feel like we have to humanize the plant in order to empathize with the plant. This kind of relates to us when thinking about plants being sad or plants screaming. Like as a science communicator, it's a helpful metaphor, right? But it might kind of misconstrue what's actually happening. And so we find ways to connect with plants through like technology. And I think the more we connect with plants as plants, the stronger of an understanding that we get. And this is why these sorts of innovations and the work that you do is so important, because we find out, wow, it's not really like us, not so much. What are some other what are some other misconceptions you think that folks might have about plant life, that this work kind of helps us understand? Now, I know this is a quick one, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. What are some of the other misconceptions you think?
I think some people maybe view plants as a little bit like static and boring. Mm-hmm. And but what's I think really cool about plants is that once you start to dig into like the scientific information about them, they are anything but. Okay?
Yeah.
Plants have been around for a very long time. Right?
Yeah.
They must be doing something right. And just the incredible diversity of plants. Also, when you think about some plants having been alive for so long,
Yeah.
and that kind of gets back to that time scale thing where how must they be experiencing time different from the way that we are? It's really pretty amazing, because like maybe that tree was stuck in one place.
Mm-hmm.
That tree's been around a lot longer than me. What has that tree experienced that I couldn't even imagine? So
Yeah.
I think, I think there are, I think also something you brought up kind of touches on this aspect of where do we kind of draw the line between like getting people interested and kind of saying whatever we need to say or doing whatever we need to do to get that interest versus like being scientifically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's always kind of a question, right? In any kind of science communication, it's like, well, how do you navigate that? And I think, to me, the initial, it's like starting out talking the language of the person that you're talking to, right? It's like, okay,
Yep.
people understand screaming, they understand
Yes.
music, right? And so
Yes.
to me, I think it's okay if we start off there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being like, have you considered that this could be a thing? And then once they're
Yes.
hooked, then they want to know more and understand like, well, how does this actually work? And like, well, what does that really mean? And then that curiosity can drive further, like more robust scientific communication.
Yes. This is why we're doing the series, Dr. Heather. This is exactly why, because one, we have a couple, even folks that are in the audience right now, they're already experimenting with sound and plants and using the nodes and EKG to kind of read and listen to plants, just to get a different idea, a different way to connect. And so as we're digging into these things in our separate spaces, I think it's so powerful to have a community come together and kind of talk about the things that we've been finding out. Dr. Heather, what you've shared with us today has been incredible, and I can't wait for the recording to actually, come out. And we'll use it as like a backdrop to keep our series going, because this idea of plants and sound is just really important, especially to like sustainability and conservation. So right before we close out, what are some of the efforts in conservation and sustainability that you have explored in this work?
So I have a special interest in coastal ecosystems, and thinking about the role of wetlands and mangroves. I think is really, really critical. Thinking about the ecosystems where we recognize the role of plants is like completely central, and there's always this pressure of like development and cutting things down versus and what is progress. I think that having people connect more with plants and empathize more with plants will help people to then take the next step and think about, wait a minute, what is the role of plants in this environment? How do I work with it instead of against it? Right? Because okay, yeah, you could chop down that tree, then you don't have the shade that you need. You're not having that temperature regulation. So then you put up a canopy, but or you could have just left the tree, so there's definitely work being done to kind of put dollars and cents to the value of plants. So that's the economic angle certainly helps. And I think the the kind of how the landscape and architecture work together. There's that angle. The role of plants in climate, the role of plants in air purification, water retention in the soil, these other kinds of things these things actually affect us as humans. And so helping to communicate that out to people, not just, the general public, but people who are in decision-making capacities, is key.
Yes. Oh man, this has been incredible. Dr. Heather, thank you so much. Online audience, thank you so much for attending today. Thank you, Dr. Heather Spence, for kicking off our summer series on plants and music, that harmonious intersection of nature, humans, music, and technology. We have an awesome lineup in the coming months. Our next program is June 28th with Dr. Paul Miller. And to learn about future online program offerings, please visit usbg.gov/programs. The link is also in the chat. And if you are local to the DC area, we encourage you to come by our garden and see what flowers are in bloom and check out the beautiful conservatory featured in those opening slides. We also encourage you to check out our full library of recorded online programs on YouTube. Simply search United States Botanic Garden. Dr. Heather's video will be posted in the coming weeks. Please note that you'll receive a brief survey in your inbox for this program. So we appreciate your feedback. And thank you for opening your afternoon with us today. You all have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Dr. Heather.
My pleasure.